Paul, good evening.
Hi. Kia ora.
Kia ora. We are here at the launch of Tapatahi this evening, and you're here since the beginning, since the start of it. Did you listen to all the speakers?
Yes, it was really, really good. I think they covered most things, actually. Yeah.
What are your three favourite or most interesting things you learned or heard?
I was just reflecting on our lifestyles here and remembering that the colonial way of doing things has gone on for about 500 years, and thinking that how we've had the benefit. Well, let's say we've taken advantage of that, and we've had the limits of growth report, and it shows that we're destroying the planet. But all
1972.
1972, yeah, and I've been aware of that. I've read those in the early 1970s, so I've been conscious of the contradiction of our lifestyles and our excess consumption. But I'm also acutely aware that it's colonialism. A lot of our resources that we're using are taken off developing countries or low-income countries. And I spent about 3 years in Latin America, and we heard of the instability in Latin America, but basically all those countries have been ripped off with resources, and it's not just in the past, it's actually continuing today. And not many people realise that the United States has instigated or organised military coups in South America and Latin America, 5 of them in the last decade. And they're basically they're doing this to ensure that we can continue to exploit the raw resources that enable us to have our extravagant lifestyles. And in the case of Venezuela, they had a crippling blockade against the country because they nationalised the oil industry, and they quite clearly want to get the oil and with American companies at cheap prices. But the most recent coup, in fact, was only 6 months ago in Peru, and basically the States is really keen on getting the mineral resources of Peru. They have large lithium deposits. At the minute, Chile is one of the biggest producers of lithium, but Peru also has big lithium resources. So they are supporting a coup government which refusing to have any more elections in spite of the huge protests from Indigenous people. Indigenous people are opposing the new proposed mineral mines near Puno in particular, and hundreds of people have been killed at the demonstrations. They're planning another big demonstration in the capital this next month, and the United States has now sent troops to Peru to back up the government. But we also must. Another country that's been threatened with a coup is Colombia, and they've just a year ago elected a very progressive president, and the deputy president is a black woman who's incredibly popular, very charismatic. But they have the president has said he wants to close down all the oil exploration, but also they're really keen on justice issues. So, and dealing with the huge amount of crime, assassinations that have occurred in Colombia over the last 50 years, and it's mostly Indigenous people, trade unionists. It's one of the countries that had the highest assassination rates of any country in the world, but it was with the support of the United States.
Thanks very much, guys.
The United States has half a dozen military bases in Colombia, and
just checking, you got all this from tonight, from what people were saying?
No, but it's but I'm really realising that the justice thing, we have to extend it beyond what we want justice in New Zealand, but when we import raw consumer products, that are made with resources that have come from developing countries. In the case of phosphate from Western Sahara, and as Mike Joy mentioned, we bring palm kernel from the Philippines and Indonesia, and so it's we need to. There's multiple reasons why we should live more simply and more at one with our planet. That one, the reason is because we're destroying our environment with overshoot, but it's also a justice issue, not justice only for the Indigenous people in New Zealand, but the Indigenous people all over the world.
So your favourite thing you heard tonight was Mike Joy talking about the impacts of industrialisation on other countries and how we're complicit in that by enjoying our industrial lifestyles here.
Yes, but I think it is really, really important that we become active, and the other speakers were really clear about that, as joining groups and speaking about these issues. And there's so much, and also using citizens' assembly, because when we talk about democracy, clearly our democracy is a bit of a fraud, but citizens' assembly, through deliberative dialogue, you end up talking about the whole issue and understanding it, and it brings everybody on board. So I'm quite convinced that that's what we should be doing, and I'm really encouraged that the dialogue on this that around New Zealand is increasing quite dramatically, and already one group in Northland has used it on the water issue. But hopefully in Pororua it's fantastic. I was actually I was one of the three that was organising a first conference on citizen assembly. Was it 3 years ago in Wellington, and a lot of things have been coming out of that. But of course, as the speaker said, that we needed to deal with te tiriti, justice, and I'm very encouraged by the group that's working here in Pororua that are being very inclusive.
Fantastic. I'm glad to hear you sounding positive about it all.
Yeah,
great. Can I ask, just to finish, about your background? I only know you as Paul, a cyclist from around Wellington.
well, I had a physics maths degree, but I joined the Met Service as a meteorologist, and so I worked in the Met Service for about 37 years. But I took leave without pay to go to South America, where I lived there for 3 years total, which I was involved in. I was employed as a climatologist for 1 year in Bolivia, but mostly to try and live like the locals, and I worked on a cooperative in Peru for 6 months, and in Chile I did a pirate whaling documentation for Greenpeace, and successfully stopped the whaling in Chile, and that was amazing. But it was only because I met people who actually assisted me. Greenpeace asked me to do the investigation, but because I talk too much and I connect with people who know other people, and they introduced me to the head of the underground trade union movement, representing 1 million workers who when I asked them, well, can you help me with this, they said yes. And they're very progressive, and that quite amazed me, to find an underground trade union movement that was, absolutely concerned about human rights and democracy, but was also prepared to go over the way to support me on an environmental campaign to stop the whaling. I found them incredibly progressive. But I found that everywhere, like in Bolivia, living there for a year with the indigenous people, the local Aymara and Quechua people, who really understood the issues. And you think that the literacy rate wasn't very high, but because they had international radio networks, they actually were incredibly aware of issues. So I could have a really deep conversation with people that lived incredibly basic lives, and I felt incredibly honoured that they would discuss or argue with me and tell me where they didn't think I had it quite right. And so that was, for me it was a mind-blowing experience living in with ordinary folk in South America.
What was it like to come back to New Zealand after that?
Well, I know that I think there's a lot of people in New Zealand, now that I'm quite encouraged who do understand these issues. But the most disappointing thing was the support for a neoliberal project, the free market and Rogernomics. And I actually wrote an article on Only the Market is Free about the application of this in Chile, and that was 6 months before we voted for the Douglas government. And I was bitterly disappointed that there was a lot of opposition to Rogernomics, to the free market, but unfortunately they prevailed, and we've had, and it's really had enormous harm to our equity to a lot of people. It's produced incredible.
Bye. I've forgotten the name of your. Oh, sorry.
Paul, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
Great to chat. Nice to meet you again.
Good.
Last time we saw each other was at the School Strike for Climate.
Yes.
Glad to see you.
Yeah.
Another event. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
Good luck getting home.